Hey everybody, I just spent the last 5 minutes talking to the camera that wasn't turned on. We're just going to jump right in and talk about a boy in the Old Testament named Samuel. I'm in 1 Samuel chapter 3. That's in the Old Testament. And again, I'm going to read out of this translation, but you can use whichever translation you have handy. I'm just going to read it because, weirdly enough, the Bible can often tell things better than I can. Chapter 3, verse 1. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under a man named Eli, which means Samuel lived in the temple and he was working for the Lord. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. That means that God wasn't really talking to people. God wasn't giving them a message. God wasn't telling them ways to live and to be or to worship. God was just kind of silent. At the time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Now, we're going to pause for a minute. The ark of God, it was a box that God's Spirit was in. We can way get into this and we'll maybe at a later date, but it was really special and really, really holy. Remember we talked about the word holy, and that holy means set apart. That's what this was. It was super, super special. I'm in verse 4. Then the Lord called, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called for me." But Eli said, "I did not call for you. Go lie down." So he went and lay down. The Lord called again, "Samuel." Samuel got up and went to Eli, and he said, "I'm here for you because you called me." But Eli said, "I didn't call you. Go lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. Verse 8. The Lord called Samuel again, a third time, and he got up and went to Eli, and he said, "Here I am, for you have called me." Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling Samuel and said, "Go lie down again. If he calls you, you will say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down. Verse 10. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." Have you ever been somewhere, maybe in your house, and you were down the hallway in your bedroom or something, and your mom or your dad or somebody that you know really well called your name, and you immediately knew who it was because you recognized their voice, because you had spent time talking to them? Samuel hadn't had that experience with God yet. Samuel didn't recognize God's voice. So it was harder for Samuel to understand who it was, because the more time we spend talking to somebody, the easier it is for us to recognize who's speaking to us. So we have two takeaways. One, we spend time listening for God to talk to us, and we're able to recognize God's voice. So that's one thing. The second thing is that God still speaks to us. God still tells us things. Maybe God doesn't show up in your room like he did in this story. But God still speaks. God can speak to us through other people, through our pastors, through little things in our hearts that we can feel or hear. That's called the Holy Spirit. I don't know. What are other ways that God speaks to us? Ooh, one big way. This. God speaks to us through the Bible. And the more we spend time listening to what God has to say, the easier it is for us to recognize who's speaking.